The silence in the grand chamber of the High Synod was not merely the absence of sound. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that pressed against the sensory organs of the 300 species gathered within the obsidian rotunda. Here, in the heart of the galactic concordat, the air was recycled through filters of crushed void gems and scented with the distinct, sterile aroma of absolute order. Light generated by the bioluminescent moss that lined the vaulted ceiling kilometers above cast long, shivering shadows that seemed to dance with a malice entirely separate from the stoic figures beneath them. High Exarch Malvath of the Silvara adjusted his ceremonial robes, the fabric woven from the light threads of a dying star, and let his multifaceted eyes sweep across the assembly. He felt the ripples of unease cascading through the psychic field that connected the high caste delegates, a tremor of fear that tasted like copper and ozone. The Silvara were beings of pure resonance, crystalline and ethereal, and they abhorred the chaotic, the unexpected, and the loud. What had occurred in the outer rim territories was all three. A signal had pierced the silence of the void, a frequency so ancient and so layered with complex fractal mathematics that it had liquefied the neural cortexes of the listening post-servitors. It was a scream from the grave of the universe, a broadcast from the precursors, the Athari, those who had woven the fabric of hyperspace, and then vanished into the mists of time. Malvath tapped a slender, translucent claw against the podium, the sound ringing out like a bell tolling for the dead. He waited for the murmurs of the Krog warlords and the chittering of the Xylth archivists to subside. The Krog, massive beasts of chitin and rage restricted by heavy kinetic dampening armor, shifted uneasily, their heavy breathing creating a low, rhythmic thrumming in the chamber. The Xylth, cybernetic insects who worshipped data as divinity, were currently in a state of logic loop panic, their optical sensors flashing rapidly as they tried and failed to parse the impossibility of the event. The signal was not meant for them. The decoding algorithms were clear on that singular, terrifying point. The encryption keys required a biological lineage that the Concordat did not possess, a genetic memory of violence and adaptability that had been bred out of the civilized races eons ago in favor of harmony and stagnation. And yet, the sensors indicated that someone had answered. Not just received, but answered. A response had been sent back into the dark, coded in the same impossible ancient syntax. "The calmness of the Synod is disturbed," Malvath began, his voice a melodic hum that resonated directly in the auditory canals of every being present, bypassing the need for translation. "The silent harmonic has been broken. The Athari beacon, dormant for 10 million cycles, has activated. We stand upon the precipice of a revelation that could elevate us to godhood or erase us from the annals of history." He paused, letting the gravity of the situation settle. "However, the sanctity of this communion has been violated. The signal carried a genetic lock. It was designed for the first inheritors, a lineage believed extinct. It explicitly rejected the encryption keys of the Silvara, the Krog, and the Xylth. It burned our telepaths. It rejected our logic. And yet deep space telemetry confirms a transmission was returned from Sector 88 Zeta, the dead sector." A ripple of shock went through the chamber. Sector 88 Zeta was a graveyard of stars, a region of space so unstable, so filled with radiation storms and gravity wells that no civilized species dared traverse it. It was the designated quarantine zone for the galaxy's mistake. It was the home of the humans. The word itself felt like a jagged stone in Malvath's mind. Humans. Short-lived, volatile, encased in soft bags of fluid and bone, lacking the crystalline perfection of the Silvara or the carapace durability of the Krog. They were latecomers to the galactic stage, discovered only 2,000 cycles ago, clinging to a rock that was constantly trying to kill them. The Concordat had denied them a seat on the Synod, citing their chaotic biological history and their alarming propensity for kinetic weaponry over energy-based elegance. They were tolerated as scavengers, useful for mining asteroids in high-radiation zones where Synod shielding failed, but otherwise ignored. They were the children of the dirt, unworthy of the high sciences. General Krell of the Krog stepped forward, his heavy magboots clanking against the floor, shattering the delicate atmosphere Malvath had cultivated. "You speak of the soft skins?" Krell grunted, his voice a gravelly roar amplified by his throat modulators. "You imply the Dirtborn answered the God signal? Impossible. They bang rocks together. They burn distinct hydrocarbons for propulsion in atmosphere. They barrel. Why understand the principles of zero-point energy? To answer the Athari signal requires a consciousness capable of processing 11-dimensional geometry. A human brain would collapse into a seizure under such load. Krell made a gesture of dismissal, a sweeping motion of his massive, four-fingered hand. It is a glitch, a sensor echo, or perhaps the humans have done something foolish and triggered a trap. We should glass the sector and be done with it. Archivist Thull of the Xylth skittered forward, his metallic legs clicking rapidly. Correction, Thull hissed, his voice synthesized and cold. Probability of sensor error 0.0004%. Telemetry is consistent. The response signal originated from the human capital ship Vigilance. Furthermore, the response was not a distress call. It was a handshake protocol. The signal accepted it. The chamber erupted into chaos. The idea that the holy signal of the Authari, the progenitors of all order, would accept a handshake from the chaotic, primate-descended humans was blasphemy of the highest order. It suggested that the parameters of the ancient masters were not what the Concordat believed. It suggested that the Authari did not value purity, silence, and crystals. It suggested they valued something else. Malveth raised his hands, amplifying his psychic output to force a wave of calm over the screaming delegates. "Silence!" he commanded, the mental shout hitting them with the force of a physical blow. "Arguments change nothing. The beacon has activated a waypoint, a set of coordinates in the unmapped void beyond the galactic rim. The humans are already moving. We cannot allow the scavengers to claim the legacy of the Authari. We will assemble the Grand Fleet. We will travel to the coordinates. We will take custody of the Discovery, and we will sanction the humans for their interference." He looked down at the assembly with eyes that held the cold, hard light of a dying sun. "Prepare the jump drives. We move to intercept." The journey to the coordinates was a lesson in humility for the Grand Fleet. The location broadcast by the signal was not in a star system, but in the deep void between galaxies, a place where the darkness was absolute and the vacuum energy churned with treacherous currents. The Concordat ships, magnificent spires of gold and white ceramic, designed for the calm trade routes of the inner core, shuddered and groaned as they pushed through the turbulent subspace eddies. The navigators wept, their minds frayed by the emptiness. The sensors registered nothing but the howling of the cosmic wind. And then they arrived. They dropped out of hyperspace into a pocket of artificial stillness, a sphere of calm carved out of the chaos by ancient machines. And there, floating in the center of the anomaly, was a structure of impossible scale. It was a ring, but that word failed to do it justice. It was a construct the size of a solar system, a band of silver and shadow that encircled a captive black hole. The Authari ring. It pulsed with a rhythmic purple light, a heartbeat that could be felt in the marrow of one's bones. The sheer magnitude of the engineering was enough to drive a lesser mind to madness. It proved that the Authari were not just precursors, they were architects of reality. But what stopped the hearts of the Synod admirals was not the ring. It was what floated in front of it. The human fleet was there. But it was not the ragtag collection of retrofitted mining haulers and outdated frigates the Synod was used to seeing. This was the Terran Systems Coalition Navy in full war footing, a sight the galaxy had never truly witnessed. Hundreds of ships hung in the void, silhouetted against the violet accretion disk of the captive black hole. They were not beautiful. They were not elegant. They were bricks of gray hyperalloy, bristling with kinetic railguns, missile silos, and heavy fusion drives. They looked like factories given engines, brutal and utilitarian. They did not glow with shields. They relied on meters of ablative armor. They did not hum. They radiated a low, mechanical growl that vibrated through the vacuum. At the center of the formation was the Vigilance, a dreadnought of such colossal size that it possessed its own gravitational pull. It was a scarred, ugly mountain of metal, covered in antennas and sensor arrays, its engines burning with a blue-white fury. "Hail them," Malveth ordered from the bridge of the flagship Eternal Light. His voice wavered slightly. He had expected to find the humans confused, perhaps terrified, perhaps dead. He did not expect to find them in formation, waiting. "Demand their surrender. Tell them they are trespassing on holy ground." The comms officer, a Silvara of the lower caste, worked the controls with trembling hands. The screen at the front of the bridge flickered, resolving into an image. It was not a grand hall or a stylized avatar. It was a bridge, dimly lit, crowded with humans in dark gray uniforms. Why looked tired? They looked busy. Monitors flashed in the background with scrolling data streams that moved too fast for the translator to parse. In the center of the screen sat a man. He was old, his face lined with the deep grooves of stress and time, his hair a shock of white against his dark skin. He wore no jewelry, no glowing sashes, only a simple uniform with a few colored ribbons on the chest. "This is Admiral Vance of the Terran Coalition," the human said. His voice was deep, scratching, devoid of the melodic overtones the aliens preferred. "To whom am I speaking?" Malveth drew himself up, expanding his bioluminescence to look more imposing. "I am High Exarch Malveth of the Galactic Concordat. You are in violation of Synod Law 77 Alpha. You have intercepted a restricted Class 1 broadcast and trespassed into a progenitor site. Power down your engines and prepare to be boarded. We will assume control of this situation." The human admiral didn't blink. He didn't look impressed. He looked. Bored, he glanced at something off-screen, then back at Malveth. "Negative, Exarch. We are currently engaged in a Level 5 containment protocol. I strongly suggest you keep your pretty ships at a distance of at least 1 light minute. The radiation spikes from the ring are unpredictable." Malveth felt a surge of indignation. "Containment! You speak as if you understand this technology. This is the Athari legacy. It is a library, a gift." Vance leaned forward, and for the first time, Malveth saw the eyes of a predator. They were dark, calculating, and utterly devoid of fear. "It's not a library, Exarch, it's a cage, and the lock just broke. We're trying to weld it shut before whatever is inside notices you just rang the doorbell." The statement hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A cage? The Athari were gods of light and reason. They did not build cages, they built monuments. "You lie," Krell's voice burst over the comms channel, the Krog general having joined the link. "The Dirtborn seeks to hoard the weapons of the gods. I say we crush them. My cruisers can turn that flying brick of yours into scrap in 3 cycles. Vance's expression didn't change. "General Krell, I've read your file. You favor plasma bombardment and close-range boarding actions. Your shields are frequency modulated to deflect energy weapons. My ships use solid tungsten rounds accelerated to 0.05% of light speed. Your shields won't stop mass. Physics doesn't care about your frequency modulation. If you fire on us, I will turn your fleet into a debris field before your plasma even clears the tubes. Stand down." There was a silence on the channel. It was the silence of a bully who had just been punched in the throat. The Krog respected strength, and the calm certainty of the human's threat was more terrifying than any scream of rage. Krell grumbled something unintelligible and fell silent. Malveth, sensing the shift in power, tried a different tactic. "Admiral," he said, smoothing his voice into a diplomatic purr. "If this is indeed a threat, why did the signal answer you? Why did it reject us?" Vance sighed, rubbing his temples. "Because, Exarch, the signal wasn't looking for purity. It wasn't looking for harmony. It was an IFF, identification friend or foe broadcast, but it was coded in a logic structure based on paradox, chaos theory, entropy. It asked a question: does the set of all sets contain itself? Your minds, conditioned for absolute order, froze. You tried to solve it. My comms officer, a 20-year-old kid named Kowalski, answered it with a joke. He sent back a looped file of a paradox. The system recognized the chaotic thinking. It recognized that we aren't bound by rigid logic loops. It unlocked because it thinks we're the janitors." "Janitors," Malveth whispered, the translation software struggling with the concept in this context. "The Athari created you." "Oh," Vance said, standing up. "The Athari were afraid of the dark. They built their empire on order, light, and geometry. But the universe isn't made of math, Exarch. It's made of mess. It's made of blood and guts and things that don't make sense. When they encountered something they couldn't calculate, something from outside this reality, they couldn't fight it. Their minds broke. So they built this ring to hold it, and they set the lock to only open for a species that could look into the abyss and not blink. A species that understands that the universe is unfair, chaotic, and dangerous. That's us. We're the ones who didn't evolve in the garden. We evolved in the jungle. We aren't the inheritors of their wisdom. We're the inheritors of their garbage." Suddenly, the ring flared. The violet light turned a sickening shade of bruised crimson. Alarms screamed across the Concordat fleet. Sensors blinded by the surge went offline. On the view screen, the human bridge crew moved with startling speed. There was no panic, only a rehearsed grim effie. "Shinsai, trace complete," a voice shouted in the background. "Breach imminent in Sector 4, the membrane is thinning." Vance looked back at the screen. "Listen to me, Exarch. You wanted to see the Athari legacy. You're about to see it. But you need to link your sensor grids to ours. Your targeting computers are going to try to lock onto the geometry of the entity coming through. If they do that, your computers will crash and your crews will go insane. The human mind is capable of doublethink. We can ignore the parts that don't make sense. Slave your systems to the vigilance. We will fire control for you." "Slave our systems to? Never," Malveth shouted. "To surrender control of the High Fleet to a primitive." "Do it," Vance roared, his voice cracking like a whip, shattering the decorum of the Synod. "Or die, it's coming through." In the center of the ring, the black hole seemed to tear open. It wasn't a portal, it was a wound. Something began to push through from the other side, something that defied description. It looked like oil, like smoke, like writhing, impossible geometry. It had too many angles. It seemed to be in two places at once. To look at it was to feel a headache bloom instantly behind the eyes. The Synod crews screamed. On the bridge of the eternal light, delicate Silvara technicians collapsed, seizing, their light dimming as their minds tried to process the visual data of an entity that existed in dimensions their brains were not wired to perceive. Malvath fell to his knees, clutching his head. It was agony. It was pure dissonance. "Link the systems," Malvath gasped, unable to withstand the pressure. "Give them control now." The command was sent. The link was established. Immediately, the screens on the Concordat ships changed. The raw, unfiltered feed of the entity was replaced by a tactical overlay generated by the human computers. It was a wireframe representation, a simplified, blocky abstraction of the horror outside. It reduced the eldritch god to a series of red targets and vectors. It was ugly, it was crude, and it was legible. The pain in Malvath's head subsided. He watched, breathless, as the human fleet engaged. They did not fight with elegance. They fought with brutality. The human ships accelerated to combat speeds that would liquefy a Silvara crew, dumping momentum into inertial dampeners that ran hot enough to melt steel. Railguns flashed, sending slugs the size of shuttlecraft slamming into the emerging entity. Nuclear warheads detonated in silent, blinding flashes, bathing the creature in radiation. The entity recoiled, shifting, trying to bypass the physical attacks by phasing out of reality. "It's shifting phase," the Krog General Krell shouted, watching the tactical plot. "Physical rounds will pass through it." "We know," Vance's voice came over the link, calm as a grave. "Deployment of Anchor-class mines authorized. Light 'em up." From the bellies of the human destroyers, heavily armored cylinders were ejected. They didn't explode. Instead, they activated massive magnetic field generators, gravity tethers that hooked into the local spacetime. They forced the entity to obey the laws of physics. They dragged it back into 3 dimensions. The creature thrashed, the void around it boiling. It was being forced to play by human rules. It was being forced to be solid, to be hit, to be hurt. "They are weaponizing gravity," Archivist Thull whispered, his processors running at maximum efficiency. "They are forcing a higher dimensional being into a lower dimensional state so they can kill it with rocks. It is. Barbaric, it is. Brilliant." The battle raged for hours. The Concordat ships under human fire control added their lance beams to the barrage, burning away the shadowy tendrils of the beast. But the heavy lifting was done by the humans. Their ships took hits that would have shattered the crystalline hulls of the Silvara. Sections of the Vigilance were torn away, exposing decks to the vacuum, but the ship kept fighting. Fires raged in the gun decks, extinguished by the void, only for the crews to keep loading. They were relentless. They possessed a stubbornness that defied logic. They refused to die. Finally, with a soundless shriek that rippled through the fabric of space, the entity was pushed back. The human fleet unleashed a final, coordinated volley, a spread of antimatter torpedoes that detonated directly in the center of the breach. The explosion was absolute. The tier in reality cauterized. The ring stabilized, its purple light returning to a steady, rhythmic pulse. The entity was gone. Silence returned to the void, but it was different now. It was not the silence of arrogance, it was the silence of awe. On the bridge of the eternal light, Malvath stood up slowly. He was shaking. He looked at the screen. The Vigilance was drifting, listing to one side. Debris floated around it. Bodies, frozen in the vacuum, drifted among the wreckage. The cost had been high. "Status," Malvath whispered. "The entity is repelled," the comms officer said, his voice hushed. "The human fleet is conducting search and rescue. They are requesting assistance for medical evacuation." Malvath stared at the gray, ugly ships. He had called them scavengers. He had called them dirt-born. He realized now the magnitude of his error. The Athari had not left the galaxy to the Silvara because they were perfect. They had left the galaxy, fleeing the monsters they couldn't fight. And they had left the keys to the cage with the only species crazy enough to stand at the gate and hold the line. "Grant the request," Malvath said, his voice firm. "Deploy all medical frigates, send the Krog repair tenders, and open a channel to Admiral Vance." The screen flickered. Vance was still there. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead. He looked exhausted, wiping soot from his face with a rag. "Admiral," Malvath said, bowing his head, a gesture of respect never before shown to a non-council species. "The threat is neutralized. You have saved the Concordat. You have saved us all." Vance chuckled a dry, rasping sound. We didn't do it for you, Exarch. We live here too. If the wolf gets in the house, it eats everyone. The signal, Malveth continued, needing to understand. It was not a gift of knowledge. It was a shift-change whistle, Vance said, leaning back in his chair. The automated systems of the ring were failing. The Athari set it up so that when the batteries ran low, it would call for help. It called for someone who could understand how to fix a broken, messy, illogical machine. We're good at fixing broken things. We're good at surviving. You possess the mindset of the old gods, Thul, the Xylth archivist, interjected. You possess the capacity for chaos. We possess the capacity for hope, Vance corrected softly, and the stubbornness to refuse to accept a no-win scenario. That entity? It's fear, pure, distilled cosmic fear. And if there's one thing humanity has plenty of experience with, it's being afraid and doing the job anyway. The political landscape of the galaxy shifted in that moment. The hierarchy of the High Synod, built on the pillars of purity and order, crumbled in the face of the truth. They were the gardeners of the galaxy, yes. They made it beautiful. They kept the peace. But the humans were the walls. They were the jagged rocks that broke the storm. Admiral, Malveth said, the Concordat formally requests. No, we beg you, do not leave the ring unguarded. We cannot hold this line. We do not have the capability. Vance nodded. We weren't planning on leaving. We'll set up a permanent station here. But Exarch, things are going to change. No more blocking our trade routes. No more dirt-borne insults. If we're going to be the galaxy's bouncers, we expect to be paid. Agreed, Malveth said instantly. Whatever you require, technology, resources, star maps. Good, Vance said. We'll send a diplomatic team to the Synod to hammer out the details, but for now, send over those medical ships. We have wounded. As the connection closed, Malvath looked out at the view screen. The Krog tenders were already moving in, clamping onto the battered hull of the Vigilance, welding plates over the scars. Silvara medical shuttles were docking, their healers rushing to treat the very beings they had despised hours ago. It was a chaotic scene. It was messy. It was uncoordinated. It was the most beautiful thing Malvath had ever seen. The signal was not for humans. It was a warning label. Danger, reality breach. But the humans had answered anyway. They had picked up the red phone when everyone else was hiding under the table. And as the Grand Fleet turned to head back to the core worlds, leaving the humans to their vigil in the dark, Malvath realized something profound. The Athari were gone. The ancient gods were dead, but the galaxy was not empty. It had guardians. They were ugly, they were loud, and they were dangerous. But as long as the humans stood watch, the darkness would not get in. Weeks turned into months, and the diplomatic landscape of the galaxy underwent a tectonic shift. The incident at the ring, as it came to be known, was sanitized for public consumption among the lower castes of the Concordat. But the High Council knew the truth. They could not unsee the tactical recordings. They could not unhear the scream of the entity, nor could they forget the sight of human marines in powered armor repelling boarders on the hull of their own ships with shotguns and magnetic boots. The image of a human soldier, helmet cracked, breathing vacuum for seconds before sealing the breach with adhesive foam, became a study in biology classes across the Xylth domains. They were studying human adrenaline. They were trying to synthesize the fight-or-flight response that allowed a soft, water-based organism to lift a girder off a TR. Apt comrade. Admiral Vance had retired from active combat command, transitioning into the role of High Ambassador to the Synod. He stood now in the same grand chamber where Malvath had once decried his species. But the atmosphere was different. The lighting was brighter, less ethereal, more practical. The air smelled faintly of coffee, a human import that the Krog had taken a startling liking to, mixed with the ozone of the filters. Vance stood at the podium. He didn't wear robes of light, he wore a suit. We have reviewed the archives of the Athari found within the ring's databanks, Vance announced, his voice amplified through the chamber. It confirms our hypothesis. The Athari were not just one species. They were a coalition, much like you, much like us, but they made a mistake. They tried to purge their society of conflict. They genetically edited out aggression, fear, and tribalism. They thought it would bring peace. Instead, it left them immune, system-compromised against the universe. He looked at the Silvara delegation. You pursued perfection. He looked at the Xylth. You pursued logic. He looked at the Krog. You pursued strength without purpose. You fragmented the Athari soul into 3 parts, but you forgot the glue, you forgot the adaptability. And you possess this. Glue? High Exarch Malvath asked, his tone respectful, almost reverent. We are the control group, Vance said with a wry smile. The Athari seeded life on Earth as a backup, a petri dish where they didn't interfere. They let us fight, they let us suffer, they let us evolve through pain. They wanted to see what would happen if a species kept its aggression but developed empathy, if it kept its fear but developed courage. We are the result. We are the synthesis of the three traits you separated but messy. Volatile. We require your guidance, Archivist Thull stated. Our predictive models are failing, the universe is becoming more entropic. The safe zones are shrinking, the entity at the ring was a scout, there are more. A hush fell over the room, the twist that had been gnawing at the back of everyone's mind. The entity wasn't a random wanderer, it was part of an ecology. We know, Vance said, his face darkening. The ring data showed a map, the Athari didn't disappear, they retreated. They built a fortress in the Andromeda galaxy. The ring wasn't just a cage, it was a distraction, a lure to keep the predators occupied while they ran away. The entities, the Void Walkers, are hunting them. And now that we've smashed their scout, they know we're here. They know this galaxy has a new apex predator. Then we are doomed, General Krell grunted. If the Athari fled, what hope have we? The Athari fled because they had too much to lose, Vance said, his voice rising, filling the hall with that terrifying human resonance. They were immortals. They had infinite art, infinite life. They were afraid of death. Humans. We're born knowing we're going to die. We have expiration dates stamped on our DNA. We aren't afraid of the end, General. We're afraid of not mattering before the end comes. Vance pressed a button on the podium. A holographic map of the galaxy appeared. It showed the Concordat territories, the human sector, and the vast, dark expanse of the unknown regions. Red dots began to appear on the rim, hundreds of them. The Void Walkers are massing, Vance said. They are coming to finish what they started 10 million years ago. They expect to find a galaxy of frightened pacifists and logical machines. They expect a harvest. He leaned forward, gripping the podium. They are expecting the Athari. They are not expecting the Terran coalition. They are not expecting the Krog to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Silvara. They are not expecting us to weaponize your shields and your warp drives. Alliance, Malveth asked. A full unification. Integration, Vance corrected. We don't want to rule you. We don't want to be your gods. We want to be your armor. You provide the tech, the resources, the logistics. We provide the strategy. We provide the trigger pullers. He looked around the room. The signal was a question. Is anyone left who can fight? We answered. Now the question is for you. The war is coming. The signal has stopped. The noise is about to begin. Are you ready to get your hands dirty? General Krell stood up first. He slammed his fist against his chest plate, a thunderous clang. The Krog will fight. We will follow the Dirtborn into the maw. Archivist Thull stood next. The Xylth calculate a 94% probability of survival if we align with Terra. We commit our fleets. Slowly, gracefully, Malveth stood. He looked at Vance, a being of flesh and blood, so fragile, yet so unbreakably dense with spirit. The Silvara pledge our light to the coming darkness. We are one. Vance nodded, a grim satisfaction on his face. He tapped his comms link. Command, this is Vance, green light, initiate protocol, phalanx. On. The map, the human territories didn't just light up, they expanded. Thousands of dormant shipyards, hidden in the nebula of the dead sector, flared to life. It was revealed then that the humans hadn't just been surviving, they had been preparing. They had found the Athari warning centuries ago, buried in Martian ruins, and had treated the galaxy not as a playground, but as a future battlefield. Let them come, Vance whispered, his voice caught by the microphones. The story of the galaxy was no longer a tragedy of a fallen empire. It was an epic of a forged alliance. The signal had been a distress call, yes, but the answer was a war cry. And as the combined fleets of the galaxy moved to the rim, turning their prows toward the encroaching dark, the universe held its breath. The humans had arrived, and they had brought friends. The camera of history pulled back, revealing the spinning galaxy, a swirl of light against the void. At the edge, a shadow was creeping in, vast and hungry. But along the rim, a line of fire ignited, defiant, bright, unyielding. The signal was not for humans, but they were the only ones who could hear the music in the noise. The preparations for the coming war transformed the Galactic Concordat in ways that would have been viewed as heresy mere cycles ago. The pristine, silent orbital shipyards of the Silvara, once reserved for the slow, artistic construction of exploration yachts and diplomatic couriers, now rang with the clamor of industry. Human engineers, clad in greasy exosuits, walked the sacred gantries alongside ethereal Silvara construct singers. It was a clash of cultures that somehow produced a harmony of efficiency. The humans brought modular construction techniques, standardization, and a disregard for aesthetics. The Silvara brought matter-weaving technology that could create hull plating stronger than diamond and lighter than silk. Together, they built abominations, beautiful, terrifying abominations. Cruisers with the sleek, organic curves of Silvara design, but clad in the ablative, scarred armor of Earth. Frigates that moved with the impossible grace of gravity drives, but bristled with the ugly, jagged barrels of kinetic railguns. The Krog, too, found a kinship with the humans. In the mess halls of the orbital stations, Krog warriors and human marines exchanged grapple tactics and stories of scars. They found they shared a common language, pain, and the resilience to endure it. The Krog respected the humans' ability to fight without natural armor, to charge into fire wearing nothing but synthetic cloth and courage. They called the humans softshells with iron hearts. But the true transformation was happening within the Council itself. Archivist Thull and the Xylth Collective had been tasked with the impossible, integrating human intuition into their battle algorithms. For eons, the Xylth had fought by calculating every variable, every trajectory. But against the Void Walkers, who defied physics, calculation resulted in error loops. Thull sat in a virtual interface with Dr. Aris Thorne, a human tactical strategist. The digital space was a white void, filled with floating streams of data. "Your strategy is flawed," Thull stated, arranging a fleet simulation. "You are sending the destroyers into a suicide vector. The probability of survival is less than 12%. "I know," Thorne replied, his avatar looking bored. "That's why it'll work. The enemy is reacting to your movements. They read the logic. They know you won't sacrifice a pawn for no gain, so we sacrifice the pawn. We feign incompetence. We lure them into the kill box." "Deception," Thull processed. "Lying, you introduce false data into the reality of the battlefield." "War is a lie, Thull," Thorne said. "It's convincing the other guy he's dead before he actually falls over. You have to stop thinking like a calculator and start thinking like a gambler. The Void Walkers are hungry. They're arrogant. Use that." Thull's processors whirred. The concept was alien, terrifying, and intoxicating, to act without certainty, to leap without looking. It was the antithesis of Xylth existence. And yet, when he ran the simulation with the human variable inserted, a variable of unpredictable aggression, the survival rate of the fleet jumped to 68%. "I understand," Thull said. "We must become irrational." "Controlled irrationality," Thorne corrected. "That's the human secret. We're crazy, but we're crazy on a schedule." Meanwhile, deep in the dead sector near the Althari Ring, the vanguard of the enemy arrived. They did not come in ships. They came as tears in the fabric of space, bleeding darkness. The Void Walkers. They were entities of anti-life, creatures that fed on the order and structure of the physical universe. Where they passed, stars dimmed and gravity unraveled. Admiral Vance stood on the bridge of the newly refitted Vigilance. The ship was now the flagship of the Grand Alliance. It was a Mons. Twice its original size, grafted with Silvara shield generators and Krog plasma batteries. "Contact," the sensor officer called out. "Multiple breaches, Sector 9, they're coming through." "On screen," Vance ordered. The view screen showed the horror. Great rifts opening in the starfield, and from them poured the swarm. Not ships, but biological constructs of shadow and bone, vast leviathans that swam through the vacuum like sharks. They were silent, but the psychic scream of their arrival washed over the fleet. The Silvara crew members winced, clutching their heads. "Hold the line," Vance said, his voice steady. "Shields forward, charge the main batteries, wait for my command." The swarm advanced. They were fast, ignoring inertia. They moved like a fluid. "They are targeting the comms array," Krell reported from his station on the bridge. "They seek to isolate us." "Let them try," Vance said. "Thull, engage the jamming. Use the chaotic frequency we discussed." "Initiating protocol. Babel," Thull's voice replied over the comms. The Xylth ships positioned on the flanks unleashed a torrent of electronic warfare. But it wasn't static. It was music. Specifically, it was heavy metal, overlaid with fractal noise and scream data. It was a cacophony designed to disrupt the hive-mind synchronization of the Void Walkers. The effect was immediate. The leading edge of the swarm faltered. The Leviathans twitched, their seamless movement breaking into confused spasms. "They don't like the noise," Vance grinned. "All ships open fire, focus on the leaders." The Alliance fleet erupted. Beams of golden light from the Silvara lances crossed with the blue bolts of Krog plasma and the invisible, devastating slam of human railguns. The space between the fleets turned into a blinding storm of energy and matter. The Void Walker Leviathans burst apart, their shadow flesh evaporating under the concentrated fury of three species working as one. But there were too many of them. For everyone that fell, three more emerged from the rifts. The sheer mass of the enemy began to push the Alliance line back. "Shields at 60%, the tactical officer shouted. "We're taking heavy damage on the port flank. The Krog cruisers are being overrun." "Reinforce them with the drone swarms," Vance ordered, "and tell the Fifth Fleet to prepare for the maneuver." "The maneuver?" Malveth asked, appearing on a hololink. "Admiral, the gravity wells are too unstable. Jumping a fleet that close to a rift is suicide." "It's not suicide if we survive," Vance muttered. "Execute." Suddenly, behind the enemy lines, space twisted. The human Fifth Fleet, utilizing experimental skip drives based on Authari tech, dropped out of warp inside the enemy formation. It was madness. It was impossible. The gravitational shear should have torn them apart. But they held together, and they were in point-blank range. "Fire everything," the order went out. The Fifth Fleet unleashed a blizzard of nuclear missiles. At this range, there was no travel time. The warheads detonated instantly. The center of the Void Walker swarm evaporated in a sphere of nuclear fire. The shockwave, propagated through the plasma of the explosion, shattered the delicate biological hulls of the shadow ships. It was a massacre. The enemy, confused, broken, and surrounded, began to retreat. The rifts started to close. "They are pulling back," Krell roared in triumph. "We have broken them." "Not yet," Vance said, watching the sensors. "They're regrouping. This was just the first wave, but we bought ourselves time." He turned to the bridge crew. Aliens and humans, working side by side, cheered. It was a ragged, tired cheer, but it was full of hope. "We hurt them," Vance said softly. "They bleed, and if they bleed, we can kill them." The war for the galaxy had begun. It would be long, it would be brutal. But the silence had been broken, the signal had been answered. In the aftermath of the battle, as the repair crews swarmed over the hull of the Vigilance, Vance walked down to the observation deck. He looked out at the stars. They seemed brighter now. Malveth joined him. The tall, luminous alien stood silently for a moment, watching the human. "You knew," Malveth said. "You knew the skip drive would work." "I hoped it would," Vance admitted. 50-50 chance." Malveth shook his head, the light in his eyes shifting to a color of amusement. "You humans, you gamble with existence." "It's the only way to win, Exarch," Vance said. "There is something else," Malveth said, his tone turning serious. "The signal, during the battle when the rifts opened, the signal changed. It wasn't broadcasting from the ring anymore." Vance turned to look at him. Where was it coming from? Malveth pointed out into the deep void past the wreckage, past the stars. "From outside, from beyond the rifts. It wasn't a distress call, Vance, not originally." Vance felt a chill. What was it? "It was a lure," Malveth whispered. "The Authari didn't build the ring to keep the Void Walkers out. They built it to keep something else in, and by answering, by fighting, we may have proven we are strong enough to handle the truth." "What truth?" "That the Void Walkers aren't the enemy," Malveth said. "They are running too. They are running from what woke up when you answered the phone." Vance looked back out into the darkness. He felt the weight of the universe pressing down on him. The war they had just fought was a skirmish. The real threat was still out there, waking up, drawn to the light of their victory. He smiled, a cold, hard human smile. "Good," Vance said. "Let it come, we're awake now too." The camera lingered on the two figures, the human and the alien, standing against the backdrop of the infinite. The stars burned cold and indifferent, but in the silence there was a new sound. The hum of engines, the charging of weapons, the beat of hearts that refused to stop. The signal was not for humans, and yet they answered, and because they answered, the galaxy had a fighting chance. The end was not coming, the beginning had just started.